This is part two of um, my talk, which I gave last month. So this is part of this, um, what to say, the 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 series which we are doing for building for India. This is the second talk on that. Um, so today I'll be talking about migrating your native apps to Flutter. We in our last talk learned something how to migrate. So in this talk will be mostly in the last talk we mostly on why should you migrate. In this talk we'll be mostly focusing on how you can migrate. So before starting the talk, I want to um, just guide you to like you can subscribe to our newsletter so that you won't miss update from our end where we post the talk which we have every month, and we will talk about the interesting thing which we are doing at Travis. So with that, I'll share my agenda for the talk. The first thing we'll go through is the recap from our last talk, to understand why should you use Flutter. Okay, but then we'll mostly focus on, okay, if you want to do a migration, what factors do you account for before actually starting a migration. And then I will give you a kind of an example, um, a, a demo of kind of example migration, how a migration looks like. We'll evaluate multiple strategies, and once we do a pick up strategy, we'll try to execute it, and then we'll talk about how a post migration looks like. With that, so let me introduce myself. My name is Sarman. I'm one of the partner at Previous. So I here mostly work on the tech side of thing and business side of things. So helping team build their mobile apps. So yeah, a bit about Trivius. We started back in 2013, worked with multiple companies, Coastal Lab, building micro ATMs, with Paradigm building tech solutions, with NoPay. We have worked with financial solutions, and yeah. So let's dive deep to our talk. So just wanted to give a recap of how what we discussed in our previous talk. Okay, so the first thing which we learned, okay, native apps don't give you the best return on your investment. So what do I mean by that? Um, Back in I would say, yeah, 2008 Android I started 2006 or 5 around iOS started. There were things, we used to do things differently. Now there are a lot of alternatives. If you want to build an app, there are a lot of alternatives we can use, okay, which solves problem of high development effort which comes with native apps. If you are building native app, you have to build for a couple of platforms, and it has its own challenges of low productivity. And yeah, now we have a much better alternative which will solve our problem. But if you're starting if you want to build an app today, so I would recommend uh, choosing native app should not be a norm. If you have a very specific use case, then only go for building a native app. The second thing we learned, we evaluated multiple different um, frameworks which can solve our problems with our native apps. We looked at Xamarin, we looked at React Native, Ionic, Flutter as well. Based on that, a lot of them are really good solution. Among them, Flutter is also one of the good solution because it kind of mimics the native look and feel of the app, which is I would think it's challenging if you're doing React Native or other platform. So we thought, okay, let's try Flutter. The next thing is, we know Okay, the native apps solve the problem. Sorry, the native app does not solve your problem with your return on investment. We have now Flutter, but should you always use Flutter? Should that be a go-to tool for everything? There are nuances to it. I would not recommend to choose Flutter or a or any framework just because it's hot and crazy in the market right now. So there are scenarios where Flutter will fail. So you need to evaluate situations where it will fail. So to understand more in this, you can listen to my previous talks where we have gone deep on why you should not use Flutter. So with that, so let's migrate. Okay, before migration, we have to understand few things. We have to keep in mind what are the factors which can impact our migration. Because yeah, migration is such a key thing. You are making a huge change to your code base, and if you don't consider all those factors, your migration can be a nightmare for you. So this factors like time is very key part of migration. You need to be aware how much time your migration will take. You need to be aware what is what is at stake if you're doing a migration, or if you're not doing a migration also, what is at stake. If we are choosing to do a migration, okay, and you have a specific code base, Android, iOS, what external dependencies it has, how will it impact your migration. Fourth thing is um, your code structure. um, yeah, you might be thinking, what's the need of code structure, existing code structure, but I'll discuss more on this once we go deeper in the talk, how your existing code structure will help you to have a better and faster migration. So yeah, first thing, time. It's always a very important thing in any work which we do in tech. Time and money, it's, I would say, the most important thing. So time here in this migration, it's challenging. Your time impacts your money, the cost of the migration. So for the first thing, um, which can impact your migration is the amount of features you are trying to build. If you have, if you have a very big app which you have been building over years, so assume it will have more than 50 features or 100 features maybe, and you need to be very mindful of how many features you have. Uh, that will help you decide the time of migration, and not just the number of features, but the complexity. You might have done something in native Android which might be simpler, but if you translate that in Flutter, is it simple, or it becomes difficult. There are certain nuances to it, which you'll know once you start doing migrations, when you need to be aware of those. Another thing is your team. You have been writing that native apps over years, adding feature on top of features. um, Now you need to have a team which can help you do this, basically migrate your app. It might be a bigger team which improve your time of migration, but you need to have a big enough team to support migration. You cannot be a single person and which have an app which have built for over years, and you want to migrate. It will be really challenging. The third thing is priorities. You need to know what is your current product backlog. If you have a huge backlog which you want to build, and your migration is not a priority right now, so let you should not take that up if that's not a priority. If that does not solve your problem, of the main problem why you want to migrate, if that doesn't solve you, it ideally it should not be done. So you need to be very aware, the team should be aware that, okay, you need a migration for a specific reason. It should solve some problem, not just because, okay, we want to do move to Flutter. Okay. Yeah, the second factor we need to consider is stakes. This is, I would say, this very important part of migration. You need to be laser focused, and you need to know, if you are making a migration, what will be its impact, the amount of user you have. Let's say you have a app which is very popular. Let's take example of Swiggy. Swiggy, let's say Swiggy wants to migrate that. Or yeah, let's take example Swiggy. They have more than 10-50 million users. The impact if something goes wrong, or there's a something which you didn't think of before migration, if that goes wrong, and you have migrated your code base in some way, you'll waste your time on something, doing something which you should not have done, or you have done a migration but in a wrong manner, it will impact your users. So you need to be very aware of what is at stake. The second important thing is SLA, basically service level agreements, where as a business you put some commitment. Okay, I want my product to be up and running for, let's say, 90%, 99% of the time. You need to be aware. Okay, if you are choosing a certain type of strategy to migrate, that should ensure that, okay, your SLAs are met. Okay, your business commitment, you might have committed something, to your partners. Okay, you are meeting, you should be meeting that requirement. The third thing is business goals. You need to be aware. Okay, the benefit of migration should always be higher than the cost of migration. What do I mean by that? Like I said, just because Flutter is very famous and in rage in current times, it should not be the reason for migration. It should have a purpose. Okay. Third thing, dependencies. Yeah, at a face of it, it will not look really important, but trust me, once you start doing migration, you will definitely realize how important are your dependencies when you're doing migrations. I can give an example of this. Let's say you have two version of an app. Let's say you have, I would say, the Google Pay app. Okay, and it has some database on Android. It might be SQLite. On assume on iOS, it's Realm as a database. Okay, now if you're doing a migration, okay, how will that migration look like? What will be the end result? Will it be a SQLite database, if it's, or will it be Realm database, or what it will be? And not just that, you have to migrate your data as well. It's not only about migrating the app, you have to migrate the data. If there are certain data, you don't want your user to be thinking, okay, where is my data, once you have migrated them to a different version of the app. So really very important aspects, understanding the native dependencies. Second point is unsupported libraries. um, there are situations you have to be very aware of, that certain thing you are used to doing in Android, iOS, like if you have an API endpoint which support HTTP3, and mostly it supports HTTP3, and if you want to do something on Flutter, will it work? Currently it won't. So you need to be aware of those. There are strategies you can solve that problem, but you need to be aware of that. That's will decide, okay, will how will your migration look like. Okay. So another point is different implementation for different platforms. So you might have certain implementation for iOS, certain implementation for Android. Okay, how will that work when you have migrated that to Flutter, basically? So you need to be aware of those as well. You might have certain business logic just specific to platforms. How will it work? Okay. The third thing is the fourth thing is the current code. So, like I said, this is also very important. It helps you decide what kind of migration strategy you will. You might think, okay, yeah, why it's important if I have to just migrate it. there you can, if your code is good enough, okay, you have quality code base that is well tested, you can opt for a specific type of migration where instead of migrating something um, in a specific way, you use your existing code to speed up your migration. Yeah, like code quality, reusability, all of this plays very impact, like has a huge impact on deciding the migration, how the migration will look like, and how successful your migration and or faster the migration will be. And the last thing which I didn't tell you, okay, there will be a lot of unknowns which can be a kind of a huge blocker once you have started migration. I can give you an example of one of the apps where we migrated something. Um, when we migrated, the web view on Flutter was not at a good stage. It was not performing well. There was huge janks. That is one of the thing. Um, there are other issues where rendering issues comes up. Text selections were not working. If you have a very content heavy app where you can user should be able to select text at the time of migration, user were so couple of years back or a year back at least, Flutter didn't supported text selections. So that was kind of deal breaker um, once you start doing the migration. So all of this kind of nuances you need to be aware of. You have to dig GitHub GitHub repos to find out all of these issues. A lot of them will not be documented in any of the I would say in any public Flutter document. Either you will find on Stack or Flow GitHub issues. Yeah, so that's that. So let's move to an example migration and let's see how this will look like. So today we'll look at Google Pay. It's an app across available worldwide. Each country have a specific variation of this app. In India, it uses UPI. In US, it because yeah, there's no UPI and all. It uses it's a credit card heavy implementation. So yeah, it depends upon region to region. This app, so the you and yeah, and this has been migrated for I would say a couple of years back or a year back at least to Flutter, and it was mostly native Android and native iOS. So now let's consider the factors. Okay, the factor which we just discussed earlier, the time. Okay, um, at the time of migration, Flutter had around 300 plus features they're supposed to migrate, and they had to do in really short period of time. To do that, they had around 180 plus developers to do in the migration, and migration just is not just moving the code. The team needs to be upskilled. They need to be trained on Flutter. There needs to be a a process that needs to be built, how the team will contribute, just given that fact that there are 180 developers and each of them has to contribute to the code base. There needs to have a process. All of this takes time, and one of the key important thing was the reason for the migration was they wanted to move to the 3.0 platform, which would help them um, move to multiple different markets. Okay, this was one of the key reasons they wanted to move to Flutter, because with the current implementation of native Android iOS, they were not able to move to multiple markets. They had to target multiple markets. In order to do that, they have to speed things up. That's why they chose Flutter. And yeah, like I said, what's at stake? At the time of Flutter, this migration, Google Pay had around 150 million active users. So you can think of the stakes, how high the stakes were. If anything goes wrong or any decision you have taken, if that goes wrong, it would affect 150 million active users of Google Pay. That's there. And there's quality of service which a financial product has to ensure. Let's say in India, Google Pay has to abide by RBI rules or your UPI standards. If something goes wrong, then you are not abiding by that. Then it has a business implications. So all of those needs to be taken into consideration. And one of the another thing, ultimately, if it goes wrong, it would mean that there's a delay in launching Google Pay 3.0 to multiple markets. You can see the stakes were really very high when they choose to do migration. Okay, like I said, external dependencies. Um, yeah, it's really important here, especially given that it's a product which is available across different markets with multiple different bank SDKs, payment SDK, UPI, all of that needs to be supported. It has native C libraries for doing barcode scanning, a lot of heavy computation happening. So all of this also were, and it has databases for offline caches and all. Okay, so that's a and code. The code. So assuming it's Google, we would assume okay the code would be heavily tested. Okay, and the native code would be reusable mostly. Okay, this is just an assumption, but we assume that okay, given the Google standard, it would be that would be the case. So yeah, so before moving to actual migration, I would like you to think. Okay, take a minute or so. Think, and if you are given this chance of migration, how would you migrate? Given you know now the factors, key factor, time, stakes, external dependency, and existing native code. How would you migrate your app? Migrate an app like Google Pay. So, yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So think on this, and we'll discuss more on this. How would migration would look like for an app like Google Pay, and you can match your answers, or you can see if my solution or your solution can be improved in some certain ways. Yeah. So let's start with the first strategies. We have divided the strategies not just on the code, but understanding the amount of changes and how gradual the changes will be. Okay. So based on that, the first thing would be feature by feature migrations, where the idea is to not migrate anything. I would say have a drastic one heavy migration, but migration in small steps. Okay. So let's take an example. Let's assume this is an Android project of Google Pay, and yeah, this is the iOS project of Google Pay. Okay, and you want to migrate feature by feature, and one of the key thing you have to first consider when you're doing this kind of migration, migrating a specific feature on Flutter, you have to make it fully isolated. Okay, if things are fully isolated, it would be really helpful for you to migrate. Or else if there's a dependency between like feature 1, feature 2, 3, it would be really difficult. So let's assume that feature 4 is fully isolated. So what would we do is we'll create a Flutter module. There are multiple ways to do it. There is what we call add to app. There can be another mechanism where you create a new Flutter project and embed this existing Android code and iOS code, and adjust your builds file to ensure that okay, it builds with it with Flutter. Okay. So now assuming you have done all of this, you have written the base classes, what would you do is, since this is a fully isolated module, you replicate those. Okay. This is just an assumption that feature 4 is fully isolated module. Okay. Then something, it will look in Android, it will look something like this, where you can see we on native side, we have removed feature 4, and it just has feature 1 and 2, and feature 4 is provided by Flutter. Okay, using Flutter. So, yeah. Same is the case for iOS as well. We have moved feature 4. Now the feature 4 is provided by, what is it, the Flutter framework. Okay. um, but in reality, is feature 4, the chances of feature 4 being fully isolated will be very less. If we are building a feature, an app which is more than 300 features, okay, the chances of any feature being fully independent is, it's very high. Okay. So what would you do is, you would try to connect the native side and Flutter side. Let's say you want, in order to implement feature 4, you want something from feature 2. Okay. So how would it look like? This would mean that now you're trying to communicate between Android world or the native world with the Flutter world, and this is done with help of channels. You can read about channel in Flutter Doc. Basically, it's a mechanism where you can communicate with the native. Flutter can communicate with the native platforms. Yeah. So, so yeah, this is just on one platform. Now you can see, I have to do the same for the iOS platform. That basically means, in order to implement feature 4, a migrate feature 4, I just not have to write feature 4. I have to ensure that there's a communication mechanism with feature 2, with feature 4, both for Android and iOS. Okay. So this is just that. Okay. Now, if what you have to do is, let's assume, okay, that I have already done that. Okay, feature 4 is implemented using feature 2. Now I have want to add a new feature. Okay, I have a requirement. Okay, I cannot wait for migration to end. I would add feature 5. Okay, but feature 5 again needs something. Okay, it might need access to the database. Yeah, now it becomes challenging. Okay, so we remember we discussed this. Okay, in Android we would have a database, something like say SQLite. Okay, if that's the case, okay, if SQLite is the case for both Android, as well as things will be simple. Okay, but what happens if there are two different databases? Okay, now the problem comes up. Okay, how would you migrate those? You can still use it, or how would the migration look? It becomes really challenging. Okay, this is just for one feature. Now you have to migrate for 300 features. Look at the scale of the problem you'll start to face. Just based on one feature you have, now you are basically adding communication onto the channel again and again. Okay, this is for just one feature you have added. Now you have to add 300 features. You have to build same number of channels, the same number of communication. And what you have to do is, you have to ensure this state. Okay, because ultimately everything is all about the state. You have to ensure that state in Flutter remains relevant in native. And if you are accessing something on Flutter, um, okay, so if you are accessing a certain state on Flutter side which is available on, I would say, on the native side, so what will happen is it should be correct. Okay, reverse should also be correct. What I mean by that, let's say you want to access something. Let's say you want to access feature 5. Okay, in feature 3, assume. Now again, that's a problem. How would you communicate that? You can see that the challenges it poses. Okay, so let's evaluate. Okay, this strategy of feature by feature migration. If you have to build for Google Pay, will that help? Let's evaluate what will the time for migration will look like. Okay, one of the key thing will be this management of state across, I would say, the native area and the Flutter area. Okay, you have to constantly keep in check if your state are in sync. Okay, and this constant check of ensuring that state are correct or not, there are high probability of leading to bugs where your states are not in sync. Okay, and it's easy to make mistakes when there are certain nitty-gritty to managing the states. Okay, so it if you adopt this mechanism, at the face of it, it will look like I can easily migrate it feature by feature, but it's when you actually start doing it, the challenges become enormous. Okay. Okay. So the next thing is stakes. How the stakes look like. Here you might think, okay, I'm just migrating feature by feature. What would be the problem? Okay, I will migrate one feature at a time. But if you take this in a different way, you are making changes and you're introducing a technology to your production workload. Okay, because ultimately whatever you have built has to be released. Okay, even if you have migrated, that has to be released. Now if you're making, because till the time the migration is not complete, you have to be very alert in your production environment. Okay, that if something goes wrong, it chances of impacting your SLAs, impacting your users, the 150 million plus users. Okay, and yeah, the goal of not releasing Flutter, the Google Pay 3.0 on time. So the stakes are really very high. Okay. Um, the third thing is dependencies. Okay. At the face of it, it looks like we can still work around dependencies, but there would be a different level of abstraction we have to do, not at a, I would say, dependencies level, but at a feature level. What do we mean by that? I mean that a feature, I would say, a feature will require a feature, not it does not need to access a database. Okay, if a feature, one needs feature to access, it will interact with feature 2, it will not interact with the databases. Okay, and then implementation can be changed based on how the migration is going on. Right. The fourth thing is code quality. Yeah, as we all know, the quality of code would be really high. Yeah, just given that it's by Google, and yeah, they really test that code bases and all. Okay, but yeah, yeah, but should we use this strategy? Um, what I find, okay, in this strategy, stakes are very high. Okay, risk of migration is very high at every level, every production deployment. Okay, you have to ensure very, it should, you should be very aware of, okay, if you're making certain changes, adding a framework, bit by bit, what impact will have, it will have impact on production. And your migration can last for 6 months, a year. You need to be very vigilant on every production release. Okay, how it's impacting. Okay, and it will ultimately slow things up, more than improving things, it will just slow things up. Okay, and yeah, who initially would think, okay, this is not something or Google Pay would use to do their migration. Okay. The next thing is rewrite. Okay, rewrite with a subtle change to it. Okay, not just rewrite, but a subtle change. Okay, so assume you have this native app, assume it's Android iOS, and you have built feature 1 and 2. It can be feature 300 for Google Pay. Okay, and you have your each platform will have their own databases, key value store, external dependencies. Okay, so what would migration would look like here is you create a different project, Flutter project itself. Okay, you don't make any changes to your existing app. Okay, so what happens here is you use whatever databases you want, which works perfectly well with Flutter. Assume SQLite doesn't work well. Assume, I'm just giving an example. SQLite doesn't work well, or Realm does not work well. You use a third database which works really good for with Flutter. Um, Here you might have a question. Okay, how would I migrate my data? Okay, really good question. But if I want to go into details of migrating that here, it would really take a really long time. But yeah, there are strategies which you can use. It can be strategy, something simple like, okay, you are migrating over a specific period of time. Okay, only this database part of it. Okay, so yeah, that there. Similarly, like in your native code base, you have base classes. Okay, the next thing what you'll do is you will write the feature one from scratch. Okay, as simple as that. You will not use any of the native projects by default. Okay, so what happens here is any change which has to be done on the native app. Okay, the only thing that changes on your current native app is that it will have bug fixes or just minor improvements. Okay, till the time the project has been migrated, it will be on kind of a support mode. Okay, so there will not be an actual feature development. It will just have features on top of features, sorry, bug fixes and improvements. Okay, so let's see, okay, how this would look like. You can see, now we are adding improvements on the native app. Okay, but we are not adding those improvement. We include those improvement as a feature in the part of the feature, the bug fixes in the part of feature itself. So this way you're not making any impact to your production. Okay, so yeah, so this is a different strategy. So let's again evaluate this. We got time. Okay, um here you don't, unlike the previous strategy where you were waiting, yeah, you are building the framework of communication using channels, ensuring the state remains in sync. Here you don't have to do it, just given the fact that you are working in a different project itself, and you don't need to be aware of I would say the Flutter, the native code bases by default. Okay, um yeah, so this overall speeds up your improvement, time of migrations, just based on the fact that you are just writing Flutter code, and you don't have to worry about integrating native and Android, iOS. Okay, the next thing is at stake. Okay, in our previous example, the previous strategy which had, okay, stakes were very high because of one important thing, um, that you are making changes to your production. Okay, while you are migrating things. Okay, it's like you are uh, changing the wheel of your vehicle while you're driving it. Okay, okay, so yeah, so here we are not doing that. Okay, here the strategy is to have a different parallel lines, parallel development for Flutter, and native development remains in a support mode. Okay, yeah, the the SLAs and all, nothing gets impacted just based on, because this does not get released. Okay, dependencies again, like I said, we use dependencies which work best for that platform. Okay, we don't have to think about, okay, will this work in native, will this work on I would say Flutter. Okay, you have to only focus on this, will this work on Flutter or not. Okay, so you might have asked a question, okay, will this support HTTP3? I would still say this will not support HTTP3, like I said earlier. So because yeah, Flutter itself doesn't, Dart itself doesn't have that support of HTTP3. But what you can do, there are strategies which you can use to ensure that you can still able to use HTTP3. But yeah, that's a topic for a different webinar. Okay, yeah, again the same thing, code still remains highly tested, highly reusable. Okay, so again the same question arises. Okay, should we use this migration? Okay, so everything improves. Let's say we started with a feature by feature migration, and then this. Okay, we solve problem one after another. Here it solves a lot of problem which we had with feature by feature migration. Now here we have one more problem. Okay, the problem here is we are stopping our production development, which in case of Google Pay will not be a good option, I would say. Okay, it would be kind of worst decision they would take if they have to stop their production and just to do a migration. Okay, so this also does not look like, but it solves a lot of problems which we had with feature by feature. So what would we take away? We build on top of this strategy to create a different strategy of rewrite. Okay, but here what we are doing is we are having a parallel development. Okay, what do you mean by parallel development? We have your native code bases, that development is going on. Okay, but you have a different team, or the same team, some part, the same team is also building the Flutter app of it. Okay, so how would that look like? It would look like something this assume you have a native app which has this both feature with 1 and 2 and the same key value store, like I said earlier, exactly same as that. But here things changes a bit. Okay, So you can see we have implemented feature one. Okay, here we will be implementing, will bring the bug fixes. Okay, we will be implementing feature 3 in the native app. Okay, and our the Flutter project will be trying to catch up. Okay, trying to catch up to have a feature priority with the native code bases. Basically, we will implement feature 2 again. So we might have a different bug which comes up in the native environment. Now the native app will fix it. All those bug fixes will not happen unless there's a specific bug which is caused because of any Flutter related code. Okay, all those the bug fix 1 and bug fix 2 will not be fixed in Flutter project, obviously. Yeah, so you can see here we are trying to catch up. Okay, this is one important thing we have to consider. Okay, your Flutter project will always be behind. Okay, at the initial stage of migration you will always be behind your native code base, because the native code base has been built over years. Okay, with huge teams. Now what you are doing is rewriting the same thing and trying to catch up. Okay, so now you can see. Okay, um if we evaluate the same strategy, how would this look like? This solve all the problems which we have with time. Okay, because our previous strategy itself solved a lot of problem around time. Since we are trying to rewrite the Flutter code base from scratch. Okay, we are not spending things which in order to support things. We are just focusing on things which works best on from day one. Okay, but you might have a question. Okay, how would you ensure that okay ultimately the Flutter code base catches up with native? Valid, definitely valid question. I'll talk about this at the end. How Google Pay help um, solve this problem. Okay, stakes. We fix the issues we stake in our last strategies, where we reduce that impact of production downtime. Okay, or any direct impact on what to say on the production right away. Okay, but there will be impact once you have completed the code base for the migration part. On the code base changes for the migration part. Okay, third thing, dependencies. Like I said, yeah, the previous strategy also solved the same thing. We didn't have to use thing which doesn't support Flutter supported by default. If we wanted to use something, there are strategies to still use that. Okay. Yeah, fourth thing, still code structure. Like I said, well tested, highly reusable. Okay. Um, so now again the question comes: should we use it? Okay. There are two questions which comes up from our PA strategy, and we compare it here. The first question comes up: okay, how would it will catch up? It'll catch up if you put more resources. What Google Pay did, okay, they started with 6 engineers initially to just to prototype things. Then they added 100 engineers, okay, to speed up the development, where they released version 1 of the migration. Okay, which released in, I would say, in Singapore and or India, I guess. Okay, then they added 100 50 more or 80 more developers to again further the development of the app, the migration. In that, they use a lot of native components. Yeah, to when they were migrating, they use a lot of native component in form of Flutter plugins and all. Okay, so they use all the native certain native code bases, like I said, HTTP3. If they had to support HTTP3, they would have to create a wrapper around the existing I would say networking stack. Okay, so those two problems, okay, can be solved. Okay, it depends upon how you take that approach. Yeah, so all of, if you compare all of the three strategies, the Flutter team chose this strategy where there was a parallel development with the native app developing the new features, as well as the Flutter team also developing the same features parallelly, just to ensure that at one moment of time they will reach in a feature parity. Okay. Well, good. Okay. But product migration is not complete just if you just migrate the code base. Ultimately, your migrated code base has to um, reach your user. Then only we can tell a migration is successful. Um, if you see, just moving a code base, like I said, just moving code base does not help your user or business right away. Okay. Ultimately, your user has to use it, and it should be equally stable like your native app. Okay. For this, you definitely need to have a post migration kind of strategy. I'll not go to very detail of this. What I'll talk about, I'll just give a gist of it. Okay, how a post migration strategy will look like. Just so that you know, if you're doing a migration, how you have the direction. Okay, the first thing. Okay, like I said, in the third strategy, where ultimately once we are done migration, the second and third strategy, ultimately once we have done migration, we don't want our main production user to use that migrated app right away, because yeah, again the stakes are high. Okay, if you just give the app and assuming okay we have just written our code base and given it to our production user, the chances are a lot of things will fail. Yeah, because production is not same as like your control environment where you have internal testing happening, beta testing happening. Production is to a huge audience base. Okay, what you can do is you can have internal testings. Internal testing within your company, let's say Google Pay team, they did internal testing and beta testing before making it public. Okay, so that's something you have to definitely do. Okay, even let's say you have done the internal testing and the beta testing, still you don't release it 100 ago, but because with the fact that even if you have done internal and beta testing, there are chances that your migration might fail for a specific set of users based on certain specific conditions. When the specific conditions are met in a production environment, so what you don't roll out at once, you roll out in stages. Stages can be anything. It can be a region, India being a region, or a region being its percentage of user in India. Okay, so it's up to you. How do you create a subset of customer and they initially start using it, and then on a gradual basis you launch it to a larger audience. Okay, fourth thing, sorry, the third thing. Okay, just releasing it in a strategic manner doesn't help if you cannot monitor your health. Ultimately, how do you know that okay if your app that you migrated is working well enough or not? How do you know? You have to constantly monitor. That monitoring phase can be months post the migration itself, just to see okay, where things are failing. If there are things which how do you ensure that that doesn't happen? Okay, you have to constantly monitor. And the fourth thing, okay, having a rollback strategy. Okay, this is really very important. Okay, just as important as knowing a factor, having a rollback strategy. Okay, at any moment. Okay, at any moment, be it uh, uh, during migration, or if it's post the migration where you have rolled out the app, something fails. There are certain situations that okay the migration is not working for a specific set of users. What do you do then? It's very important to have that rollback strategy. There can be multiple different ways. Either you release same you build your migration in a specific way that okay if you roll back that version of the app, the existing user can be able to use the previous native version of the code app basically. So there are multiple different strategies. It's entirely depend upon your use cases and all. That decides which strategies. How do you have a rollback strategy? What kind of how the rollback strategies looks like for your app. Well, so that was all about doing the post migration, and with this, we end the migration, how a journey looks like. So with this, I would say there are three key takeaway if you are doing a migration. Okay, if you are even thinking of doing migration, you have to absolutely have these three in mind. Okay, there is no silver bullet for migration. What do you mean by that? Like I said, for you, it might not make sense to have a complete rewrite at one go and do it. Okay, because it made sense for Google to do it. Okay, that doesn't mean it will make sense for you to do it. If you have a small app, okay, where you don't have that stakes, the stakes are not very high, but you still want to ensure you release step by step, you take up the first strategy where you are migrating feature by feature. Let's assume you have 5 feature and you don't want to spend a lot of time um, waiting for that migration to be complete. Okay, um, that you can pick up. Okay, second part, okay, be aware of nuances. um, like I said, the nuances, the web view not working properly or text selections having issues in some version of Flutter. Okay, so those nuances you need to be aware of when you're doing migration. How do you ensure that, okay, if the text selection were working on the native version of the app, how is how do you ensure that that still works if you do a migration with Flutter? Okay, there are strategies, it's up to you how you do it. Yeah, the third thing is having a post migration strategy. Like I said, things can go wrong in production, and most of the time it does go wrong in production. Okay, so always have a risk mitigation plan, so that if even if the migration fails at any point, be it the thinking phase or it fails at during the migration, the code based migration, or even at the post migration phase, there should be some strategy so that you can roll back and release reduce that the risk of that failure. Yeah, with this I would conclude my talk by saying, if you are what to say, if you want to do migration, please have this in mind. Yeah, and in upcoming in our next month, we'll be talking about one of the key things which we are doing at Trivia's, building offline first apps for Indian audience. That there are a lot of new things we'll learn in terms of technology, how tech aspect of it, the behavioral aspect of users, how an offline first app works. Yeah, so we'll be really excited to talk about this in our next webinar. So with this, yeah, so you can reach out to us, reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you can email me. Yeah, I'm available on Twitter as well. Here are my social media handles, and yeah, we do a lot of mobile development work. If you are interested, you can reach out to us. We help team build and develop native Flutter and yeah, Flutter apps. Yeah, and also all this talk will be available on our newsletter. So do subscribe to it so that you don't miss this update or any upcoming updates.